All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. Today is Sunday, August 10th. We are fresh off of a Tennessee Volunteers scrimmage, which took place on Saturday, and we're about 7 practices deep into this fall camp slate so far. So last time we came to you on the Press Pass, we were sort of getting rolling and getting everything started. Now we've got a little bit more takeaways to get to under our belts. So that is what today's show is about. Just kind of talking about what's been going on in fall camp, what we took away from yesterday's scrimmage. We got to talk to Josh Heupel after the thing. We didn't get to see it ourselves, but certainly heard some takeaways from the head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers. So that is what is on the menu for today. My name is Rick Butler, joined as always by my 2 partners in crime, Ryan Sylvia and Ryan Schumpert. Hopefully you guys are having a great day. Schumpert, how you doing, my friend? And what's been going on this Sunday?
Good. Yeah, Sylvia and I have already seen each other this morning at
Yeah.
K-Brew. Had a nice little conversation, and we're chatting it up. So I don't know why you weren't at K-Brew this morning, Rick. We didn't even have to text each other about it. We were just both there. So
Yeah, you guys were on the same page. On the other hand, I saw one of our media cohorts. I saw the great Adam Sparks at Nukes. So we're throwing out a little free publicity for our some of our favorite spots in town, and maybe where you might find some of the UT football media if you're going out on a Sunday morning.
I will say I've
that's exactly
seen
right.
multiple other UT media members at that K-Brew. So if you're trying to stake out and find some UT media members, it's at that K-Brew, the one in Westtown, not the one in Westtown is where you can just hang out there all day, and I'm sure you'll see someone.
Yeah, go pick some brains while you're at it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
See if you can get any good information. Well, I think what everybody wants to talk about right now to just kind of start things off is the big news from Saturday. And that was Joe Milton's touchdown pass in the Cowboys preseason. Did you guys see that one? Did you see that nice touch pass to no, nobody wants to get into that. Guys, well, I guess let's start with fall camp and Ryan, I'll turn over to you as I try to get my camera fixed right now if you're watching this great episode here on YouTube. But just kind of start off with you and we did get to talk to Josh Heupel again for about 11 minutes yesterday. What were some of your takeaways coming out of it? Do you start with the quarterbacks, or did anything else sort of take your mind here in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of the quarterbacks and a little bit of the rumblings out of the scrimmage as well, that maybe Jake Merklinger didn't have a very good day, and that George McIntyre did have a pretty good day, and that just maybe the passing game as a whole wasn't fantastic, which I don't think is a huge surprise to begin with. I don't think any of us think that's going to be a strength of this football team, and a little more so with some of the receivers they had out. But yeah, I think the McIntyre thing, especially with the fact that Josh Heupel said, he doesn't anticipate. He didn't say this completely firm, but he said he doesn't anticipate, cutting it down or adjusting reps, I think is essentially what he said, which to me, I read that as he's not saying that, all right, we're eliminating McIntyre from the conversation, who he's kind of been the forgotten guy. He's the third guy, the true freshman. He's, as we've seen when we've been at practice, Merklinger and Aguilar splitting reps with the ones. It's been pretty consistent, McIntyre with the threes again while we've been out there. So I thought that was pretty notable. The other stuff he said about the quarterbacks, kind of were classic Josh Heupel. He wasn't saying a whole lot, a lot of coach speak, but I did think that was noteworthy, especially with some of the rumblings that came out of the scrimmage as well.
Yeah, I think quarterback's kind of where you have to start. It's the most intriguing kind of position battle right now. Tennessee's got a few of them, but quarterback's the most important position in football. And when you have all the drama that you had this offseason that Tennessee had with the whole Nico Iamaleava situation that everyone's sick of talking and hearing about, but it does create a lot of intrigue about what your quarterback situation is now going to look like. And now that it seems like, especially the program really wanted to quickly, and I think the fan base for the most part has turned the page now past Nico and onto what Tennessee has on the roster. It's still a very intriguing thing to see what these guys are going to look like. And we've gotten a small taste of it at practices, but you have to assume there's no better way besides an actual game to figure out who's your best option than those scrimmage type of formats. So it was interesting to hear what Josh said about, how those guys did. I thought it was very interesting. Like you mentioned, how this would have been the perfect time to cut the list. This would have been the perfect time to say, no, we're not naming a guy, but we are between these two guys. And that's not what Josh Heupel did. So do I expect George McIntyre to be the starter? No, but it's interesting because you do hear, murmurs around the program, things of that nature. Not that he's the best quarterback, but like, man, that kid's talented. And you can definitely see why he was rated highly and why he could have a future at Tennessee and at the SEC level. So even if it's not this year, I think it's a good sign to hear positive stuff about George McIntyre at this point.
Yeah, and I think that whenever you're talking about this quarterback situation, right, you're talking about it in pencil. And what I mean by that is
Mhm.
that everything is fluid, right? Things are changing. And you guys are right. I think that was one of the most notable things is Josh Heupel's exact quote yesterday was, "I don't anticipate us dramatically changing the reps right now." And you can read into that multiple different ways, but to me, just exactly like what you guys are talking about there. And I do think that people are. I think not that it's just to kind of get a gauge of interest on the things is that I think that people are going to be talking about George McIntyre here a little bit more, maybe online or just from some of the reports that they're trying to piece together. And I don't blame them for that because, hey, if George McIntyre is getting talked about to that degree, then he's going to be a talking point within the fan base. And so that is an interesting sort of step that we're at here and not personally something that I anticipated, but you give credit to a guy who's come in and obviously gone to work and who's playing in a situation where there's just not a ton of pressure right now, right? He wasn't expected to be that third man. I know in my case, I sort of not wrote him off by any stretch, but there were times where I talked about the quarterback battle as a two-man competition. But it is extremely noteworthy, I think, that they said, hey, I'm not dramatically changing new reps right now. And Sylvia, I agree with your point that says that, hey, I still don't think he's going to be the starter right now, but again, you're talking about the quarterback situation in pencil, so you can have that eraser here close by as well.
Yeah, I think so. And look, we're gonna do a little bit later in this podcast conversation about some predictions for who's gonna win some position battles. So, we're talking about quarterbacks. Might as well just start that one right now. Look, I'm pretty skeptical about George McIntyre. And look, I'll just go back to you said, Rick, you weren't writing him off. When it came to this quarterback competition, I was writing him off. I didn't think he had any chance
Mhm.
to win this battle. Didn't mean he couldn't play, couldn't be Tennessee starter long term. But I think still I'm pretty skeptical. I think it's going to be Joey Aguilar to start the season. I always thought it was going to be Joey Aguilar to start the season. Um, I think I was probably higher on Merck than most. Certainly not higher than our buddy Chase Thomas. I don't think anyone in the world's been higher. I don't think the Merklinger family is higher on Jake than Chase Thomas is. But with all that in mind, I think that's where the George stuff I think becomes interesting. If I think Joey's going to get the first crack at this if Joey doesn't play well, if Aguilar does not play well, he struggles early, and Tennessee wants to go to another quarterback. I think now, in my mind, it's becoming a much more realistic possibility that George McIntyre is that quarterback. Whereas in the past, I would have said, yeah, it's definitely going to be Jake Merklinger. He would definitely be that quarterback Tennessee would pivot to. I'm not as confident in saying that now. I'm not completely writing Merklinger off, but, it felt like when you talk about the context of this battle of he's the one that's been here, he's the one that's been in the offense. First scrimmage, that's the one he should have been feasibly been the best in compared to the other quarterbacks because of that experience. And for him to struggle, I think it definitely feels like a missed opportunity for him, which doesn't mean that he can't win the job or, be that backup that if Tennessee wants a fresh look at things when they turn the calendar to October because the offense is stalling a little bit. It can't be him, but it definitely seems to me less likely than it did entering Saturday.
I think that's fair. I would still, pencil in Joey Aguilar as the projected winner of this battle, just because it just feels like the easiest choice to start with. But I would not be surprised at all if throughout the season, you saw multiple quarterbacks get reps with the first team for Tennessee, and that doesn't mean there's multiple starters, doesn't mean there's a two quarterback system or anything weird like that. I just think there's a possibility that whoever wins the job, maybe the offense does start to stall, or maybe you go out in those first few weeks, there are some interceptions thrown and things like that. I would still say it's probably Jake Merklinger who would be the second guy to get a crack at things if Joey Aguilar did win instead of George McIntyre. But it feels closer. It felt going into camp, it felt like to me, I was pretty confident it was going to be Joey Aguilar. And then I was pretty confident that Jake Merklinger was easily in second. It felt like a pretty clear 1, 2, 3. I would still stick with that order, but it feels a lot more narrow in all those different battles. It feels more narrow of Joey Aguilar being the starter, and it feels more narrow of Jake Merklinger being this clear-cut number 2. Like I said, I would still stick with that 1, 2, 3, but I think it gets a little more of a gray area than a black and white, I guess, at this point in the offseason compared to where we were like 10 days ago when this thing started.
Yeah, Rick, I'll throw this question to you, and it's a tough one, so sorry to go ahead and you have no advance for what this is going to be, and I don't even know what my take is on it is. More Say more about George McIntyre, or does it say more about Jake Merklinger and Joey Aguilar that Tennessee isn't ready to whittle this thing down to 2 quarterbacks after the first scrimmage?
That is a tough question.
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit of both, I think for sure.
I was gonna say I think I'd have to kind of reason through my thought process, and maybe I'll get to an answer. But I think it's a little bit of both. And again, that you say that, but you don't entirely know, I guess, where the starting points were each were. How much to this Tennessee
Yeah,
coaching staff. We have our expectations here from the outside, and again, those are expectations that we've sort of made some. I don't want to say assumptions. I don't think that's the right word, but we've tried to connect some dots with them, whether it be the stats that Joey Aguilar put on paper, whether it be the experience that you feel like Jake Merklinger had in the system. And so again, we sort of have maybe what our thoughts were going into the things, but ultimately we don't know what the coaching staff had in terms of where each guy was in the starting point. So you're right. That is a question of, is it George McIntyre significantly rising to the occasion? Is it the other guys sort of, falling down and not really, grabbing the bull by the horn, so to speak, and trying to really wrangle this thing and earn that title? I guess maybe I would lean towards the idea that those top 2 guys, just because they do have some sort of experience to their name, whether it be in college football in general or with the Tennessee system, maybe the fact that one of them hasn't, tremendously gone out there and captured the job. And again, maybe we wouldn't expect that somebody would be named a starter here at this point in the season, or in the offseason, the preseason. But maybe speaking to the fact that one of those guys hasn't gone out there and sort of captured that role, or at least we haven't heard about it yet. Maybe that leads you to believe that those guys just haven't been, haven't been playing up to that. I don't want to say potential. I'm kind of thinking this whole thing through while I'm talking about it. But then again, I think that doesn't take away the credit from George McIntyre. If he still is in this race, then all credit to him for what he's gone out there to do. And maybe some of that's just because he hasn't been playing with as much pressure. He sort of,
yeah.
understands where he is in this battle, and understands that maybe he wasn't being looked at as one of those top 2 choices, so he can just go out there and play. And I think there is something to say about a football player in general, but a quarterback as well, who can go out there and play with a little bit of freedom. And I think maybe that's been one of the things that has helped George McIntyre so far.
I think
Sylvia, what you think?
Yeah, I think it's more saying about George McIntyre than it is about the other 2 guys. Because to me, it still feels a little ceremonial. It still feels a little like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a 3-man race, but I just truly can't see George McIntyre going out in the Syracuse game and being the starting quarterback still. It just feels like
yeah.
that. By the end of the season, who knows? Maybe that is what they go to. But to me right now, it feels more like, hey, George McIntyre, you've done a great job throughout fall camp. You've shown a lot of flashes. You're still so young. There was no expectation for you to be the starter for sure when you got here, and Nico was still on the roster. You're doing a great job. We're going to, you're still going to get the reps you were getting at this point. We're not going to cut those short because you like what you've seen so far. Maybe he can be something in the future. But at the same time, it just still feels very unlikely to me right now that George McIntyre goes out and wins this starting quarterback battle before the season begins. So to me, I think it says more about what George McIntyre has done and less about maybe what Joey Aguilar and Jake Merklinger haven't done to this point. Although I think there is some credence to it. Feels like, reading between the lines of what Heupel said and things like that, it does not feel like one of those guys has jumped out and grabbed a lead for this job yet. That's what Josh Heupel kept saying this offseason was someone's got to go out there and earn it. The entire team has to understand that this guy deserves this role, and he's gone out and he's done what he needs to do. So there's no second guessing. There's no split in the locker room type of deal with, no, I think this guy won. I think that one of them has to go out and earn it. It feels like right now, as we're a couple weeks, 3 weeks away from kickoff, it doesn't necessarily feel like anyone's gone out and grabbed the job at this point.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. That it certainly doesn't feel like there's been a ton of separation from, like, it's
Yeah.
what you said earlier, Ryan. I think from 1 to 2 and the 2 to 3, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of separation, even though it maybe still feels like there's, Aguilar 1, maybe Merklinger 2, McIntyre 3. That might have been what the expectation was, or what's the term, Rick? You were talking about it, or the term that I wanted to interject. But I didn't know exactly what it is. Summon hypothesis, educated hypothesis. What's the science term we learned in science class? That's
Is it
that might have
an
been
educated guess as a hypothesis?
Educated guess essentially is that that would have been our educated guess as to what the order is, but it doesn't feel like it's truly become cut and cut and dry. So other news from the scrimmage, couple players out, which isn't and a couple players in, nothing overly surprising. Chris Brazel, who is, as since we've been recording, Adam Sparks has reported that was arrested later this week, driving on a suspended license. We haven't read all the details on that. Doesn't sound like the most severe situation in the world, but he's been out with an injury anyway, so that he didn't scrimmage. That had not. Well, I don't know if that had nothing to do.
Too. I think that's
he was there. We saw him, but he
play.
wasn't scrimmaging. Yes, that doesn't. Him not scrimmaging does not feel correlated with the arrest for driving on a suspended license.
Yes.
But he's not out there. Braylon Staley's not out there. Josh Heupel says Mike Matthews did participate. We saw him in a red non-contact jersey. So how much was he doing? A little bit uncertain. Boo Carter was out there. We did see him fully dressed out. I don't think Josh Heupel said any of this, but Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson, we did not participate, which was not a surprise. Obviously, McCoy's still working his way back, starting to do a little bit more from the torn ACL. And then Ricky Gibson has missed the last couple of days at practice. So I think those are the big ones when it comes to who was and wasn't out there. I don't know, Rick or Sylvia, if either of those things were particularly notable, or when it came to just who was participating, if anything really surprised y'all in what we heard or saw on Saturday.
I don't think so. It felt pretty standard of what you would expect. Miles Kitselman, another guy in a red non-contact jersey, which he's been in throughout all of fall camp. Colton Hood, who's expected, if Jermon McCoy's not ready to go, he's expected to be that other starting corner. He was in that red non-contact jersey, which we saw him at practice in the day before as well. But it looked like both those guys, to what degree they participated in, I'm not sure, but it seemed like both of those guys participated in some shape or form. So I didn't think there was any surprise. I didn't think there was anyone that was weird that was hit the panic button. Of course, it's not great that Chris Brazel hasn't been able to do anything yet. Like, that's not a good sign for someone you're expecting to be one of your starters and potentially your most reliable option, as easily the most experienced guy in the room. It's not great that Mike Matthews is banged up right now as the other guy that you're expecting to start and be a huge contributor on the outside. And it's not great that Braylon Staley's injured, who you expected to start in the slot. So none of those things are good, but it's not surprising at this point because it's what we've kind of seen transpire for the last few weeks that we've been at practices. So I don't think any of it's a surprise. The receiver depth continues to be a concern, but we knew that before anyone was injured too. That's been something that everyone knew this whole offseason is, man, that group is thin, and if they start to get banged up, that could get hairy in a hurry. However, maybe you try to spin it in some way and you go, well, Travis Smith Jr. is getting reps. Rodarius Jackson's getting reps. Those guys are getting some more reps than maybe you expected them to going into this season, because now all of a sudden it looks like whether those guys are healthy enough to start the year or not, they're going to play in some shape or form as true freshmen. So maybe getting some extra work under their belt could be good in the long haul.
Yeah, I think, the phrase young guys don't have time to be young is something that we've heard a lot, throughout the preseason so far from Josh Heupel, from some of the players who have echoed that back. And in a lot of ways, that is typical coach speak. And I think it's probably something that we've heard in past seasons from Josh Heupel as well. But it does, to Ryan's point right there, it does feel it does feel applicable to the wide receiver room. And you're right. It is, in some ways, I think concerning that you are trying to go through this quarterback battle, and maybe one that we just said a minute ago doesn't have a ton of separation from 1, 2, and 3. And you're doing that with, a wide receiver room that has been banged up, that has been limited. But you're also right in saying that, when Josh Heupel talks about young guys not having time to be young, at least some of those other guys are getting valuable reps. And it was, a highly touted, group of wide receivers who came into this class this year. And I'm not saying that all of them will play or what sort of production any of them will have, but just being able to get this production here, I think early in the season, it could pay dividends in this season. It could pay dividends in the next season, whatever it is. But certainly different ways to look at that wide receiver room. And then I thought that, not on an injury note, but I thought that one of the other things that was interesting coming from yesterday, just staying on the offensive side of the ball, and Sylvia, I'm pretty sure you wrote about that this morning, is that Star Thomas got a lot of praise.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like it was real, genuine kind of stuff that Josh Heupel was talking about. I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but just saying that he was a drastically or dramatically, I can't remember what word it was, but a really different kind of player than what he was when he stepped on campus. And I think that's great for Tennessee's running room because of the passing game is going to be a little bit inconsistent throughout the year, which I think might be a fair projection to have, then that running back room is going to need to be that much more important. So if you can bring in a guy like Star Thomas, have him, whatever his ability is going to be in that room, alongside Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop, then I think that's great. So that was another big takeaway from yesterday, just at least on this side of the ball for me.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Heupel doesn't often say anything anything with a bunch of punch in it. And I think the way he talked about Star Thomas was because of that, all the more so, was definitely notable. I don't know, anything else from the scrimmage kind of leads us into some of the position battle stuff. We can start with running backs unless y'all have anything else coming out of Saturday's action.
I think you just touch on the offensive line quickly. It seemed, said that the center battle is still ongoing between Sam Pendleton and William Satterwhite. You've seen at practices when they're available, they're both getting those different types of reps. We haven't seen them, get fully lined up with like their starting 11 or anything, but you've seen them kind of go through the drills, and they're both getting their fair share of things. And then David Sanders Jr., who's expected to be that true freshman starter at right tackle. Heupel touched on him too, saying he thought he did a really good job, that he's had a good stretch of practices through training camp and things like that, and that he handled himself well in the spring game. So I think that's something to note, because there is a lot of, as you just mentioned, all those position battles, but there is a lot of kind of unproven pieces, inexperienced pieces, I guess you could say, for Tennessee. I mean, you're returning just one offensive lineman, so it is not the most experienced group on that side of the ball at a lot of different positions. So it's interesting to hear what Josh Heupel has to say. Not that you expected him to be like, yeah, David Sanders Jr. sucked at the scrimmage or something like that, but the things he said, I think were appropriate and gives you some confidence to a certain degree heading into the season.
Well, and it goes back to what Glenn Ellerbe. It goes back to what Glenn Ellerbe said as well earlier in the week about David Sanders Jr. specifically, is that he said, hey, not only has he approached the challenge of gaining weight strong, I believe it's about 40 pounds that he's put on so far this summer, sitting just shy of 310 right now, but it's also, Ellerbe said that, and whether it's true or not, he said that, hey, this guy's been as committed, if not more, to the mental side of things than anybody else on the line. And so when you're talking about a position like right tackle, especially when you're adding in the nuance of a quarterback battle going on behind him, I think that's a great thing to see from a player who, are growing pains going to come as a freshman in the SEC? Yeah, I'm sure they are. But, to be able to have sort of that readiness and that preparedness going into the season, I think is all good things to see. And, added on by what Josh Heupel had to say about him yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. I think with the offensive line too, the thing, I don't know, like we talk about question marks and stuff on the offense, or just in general on a team. And I think question marks can be very different in the sense, I don't know if y'all have the same vibes to me. Question mark quarterback, question mark receiver, question mark at offensive line. I'm a lot more optimistic about what they can be on the offensive line as opposed to the receiver and quarterback. Like, there are question marks at quarterback and receiver. I just don't think they're going to be very good there. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Offensive line, there's question marks because of what you said, Sylvia. There's one guy back, and Lancer did not play at a very high level last year. But with all that said, I see the path of them being pretty good on the offensive line. I don't know if they're going to be the best offensive line in the SEC or anything like that, but I think they can be better on the offensive line than they were last year, and really they've been in the last 2 years. So that is notable, and it did seem like the buzz was pretty solid. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying great, but good around the offensive line Saturday. And that's the thing with all the stuff in the preseason in college. That it's good for one group, that means it's bad for another most of the time. So how do you judge how good it is for the offensive line or bad for the defensive line? But I think there's a trust level with what the defensive line, at least as a floor, is going to be. Because even when the Tennessee's defense wasn't very good, Heupel's first couple of years, the defensive line was solid. So to me, that was a good sign coming from everything on Saturday.
Yeah, I think the offensive line has a very high ceiling. Like, the ceiling is to be the best offensive line Josh Heupel's had yet. The floor is pretty low because it's so unproven, and you haven't had a lot of those guys play SEC football yet. So the floor could fall out, sure, but the ceiling feels high. And I think if you had to pick in that wide range of results, where in reality it's going to be, I think it's probably towards that ceiling, or at least closer to the ceiling than it is to the floor. Because I think that there are a lot of very nice pieces on this offensive line. I think Lance Hurd is going to have a fantastic year. He's finally healthy. He's got a year under his belt in Tennessee and being a full-time starter and doing all those different things. I think that's going to result in him being a very effective left tackle. When you look at the interior, Wendell Moy Jr. is a very experienced guy. It's not the SEC level, but he's played a lot of football at Arizona and a lot of very good football. He was fantastic there. And it's not the SEC level. He's not facing the defensive fronts of the likes of Georgia and teams like that he will at Tennessee. But against the teams he did play, he was very good. Sam Pendleton's another guy where he played at Notre Dame, so you're getting a lot of ACC games and some pretty good out-of-conference games as well. And he would kind of bounce in and out of the starting lineup and things like that during his career there. But he's experienced, and he's only been talked about glowingly by Tennessee staff since he got here. So I think you got to like those guys. The biggest question to me is how ready is David Sanders going to be at right tackle? And the ceiling for that as a 5-star, one of the highest rated players in the class, is as high as it gets. Now, he's still giving up a little bit of size for most SEC tackles at this point. Even though he's put on those 38 pounds, he's still going to be a little undersized. But it's a great sign that he was able to put on that much weight in that much of a hurry, and it still feels like he's kind of light on his feet and agile and able to do all those different types of things. So it feels like, I guess 2022 would be the best offensive line Tennessee's had to this point. There was NFL talent on that offensive line, and guys like Darnell Wright, who was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. But this unit, I mean, if they kind of gel well and all 5 spots can kind of cement themselves, which isn't something we've seen much under Josh Heupel. There's been a lot of almost rotation at times at the weak spots at the offensive line. This unit could be pretty good. And I think that it's got a better chance to be one of the stronger units than, like you're saying, Shumpert, in the quarterback and wide receiver rooms. It feels like I would bet more comfortably on the offensive line being a strong group in those 2 spots.
Yeah, I think so as well. And to me, here's a question. Well, there's multiple questions with the offensive line. Here's one of the big questions with the offensive line. We know Josh Heupel does not often get super creative in short yardage situations. Who can they and who can't Tennessee line up and run the ball on 3rd and 1 to get the first down against? That's my question. 2022, they were the best at that, and some of that makes sense. Hendon Hooker was a good running threat. He was a much more accurate underneath passer than anyone they have had since. But it doesn't really seem like they're going to have a great running threat or a great underneath passer this year either at the helm. So can you line up and run the ball? It goes in ranges. Certainly the teams in the bottom of their schedule are going to be able to do it against. Can they do it against Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State? And then obviously the big question, the biggest challenge, can they line up and do it against Georgia, Alabama, and Florida of the world? So, I'm not sure there. Pass protection needs to be better. Run blocking is always solid. They are always able to run the ball pretty well. I think that's a big question, in large part because of the interior of the offensive line and all the new players there. So let's start there for some position battle predictions, and we'll lump this in. What do we think Wendell Moy is going to settle at left guard? He's kind of worked at both left and right guard. Seems like left guard's the more likely spot that he settles at.
I think that's probably fair. And then you're looking at either it kind of depends almost to me what William Satterwhite does to see what the entire offensive line picks out. Because if William Satterwhite's great and they trust him at center, which I think he's a redshirt freshman, so he's still got plenty of time even if he doesn't win it this year. But if he's ready to go this year and they're confident and comfortable with him being the center, then I think it's easy to slide Pendleton back over to guard, which is where he's played the majority of his career at. He got a little bit of reps at center at Notre Dame, but that was in practice situations, not in games. So if you're ready with William Satterwhite, it feels like that's when you put Moy at the one guard and you slide Pendleton over to the other guard. And then Shane Mumarov's a fantastic option on the interior if one of those guys gets banged up, or if maybe someone's underperforming. You do want to try to get another body in there, keep guys fresh, and do different things like that throughout the season. That's what it feels like it comes down to for me. Otherwise, I think you go Pendleton at center, and then opposite of Moy, who feels like he's pretty much locked in one of those interior spots, is where you go Shane Mumarov, who also feels unproven, but he's got plenty of years under his belt at this point, and it feels like they're comfortable with him if he is the option.
Yeah, I agree. Sleep on Jesse Perry either.
That's fair. They spoke very highly of him just a couple days ago.
He's been raved about this year.
And we saw him, I don't know, running would be the right word, but as they were going through some drill stuff, working with the ones at right guard earlier this past week. So he's, how much did we really actually learn during fall camp is more of just getting a new perspective. He's a surprise. I think I would not have thought that he was a legit candidate to start in his second year on campus. And I don't know that he will, but I do think it's a legit possibility now.
Yeah, and I think he's a name to watch in the future, or potentially as one of those depth pieces as well. But you're right. He's a guy who Glenn Ellerby basically said, "Hey, you don't want to call anybody perfect, but he's basically as close to an accolade as I could give that to." He's been somebody who's caught my eye just from some of the conversations this preseason. But I think Sylvia's right. You know what the hinge pinge that is William Satterwhite, I think tells you kind of what maybe the trend of this offensive line is going to be, at least at the start of the year. And that's why the center battle has been talked about so much in the media. And it's been asked about to Josh Heupel. It's been asked about to Glenn Ellerby. And I think because that ultimately is what's going to give us the best idea of what they're going to do with that spot. And I agree with Sylvia as well that I think Sham Umarov, maybe this is his time. It's finally approaching. If they need him to slide in, I wouldn't feel too bad about that because I feel like he's a guy that gets it. Now, again, we haven't seen it very much on the field in an SEC type of environment, but I feel like in all the other things that you can do to sort of build into actually starting on the field, he has taken the bull by the horns. He's kind of flourished in those ways. And we've heard a lot of praise just about his work ethic, his behind the scenes strengths and mentality and the way that he goes about his business. But you're right. I think if William Satterwhite can get that center position down, then you look at the two transfers as your guards. And I think we've already talked about the tackle situations with Lance on the left and David Sanders Jr. on the right. So certainly everything to me kind of revolves around that center position. But ultimately, when you're talking about the offensive line in general, I just think it's a puzzle piece. It's almost like one of those little sliding puzzles, where there's one piece open and you can kind of move different things around and you can create different pictures from it. That to me is kind of what this line feels like, and just sort of how are they going to move things around? How are guys going to solidify in their spots to ultimately make the picture heading into the offseason?
Here's a different perspective on this battle. I, in some ways, almost feel like in a weird way, it's almost William Satterwhite versus Sham Umarov / Jesse Perry. I think Pendleton's going to start somewhere.
Sure.
It just depends, for sure. It just depends if it's
so.
guard.
I think you're right, Sylvia, and Rick, you said this too. The most ideal thing is Satterwhite grabbing the job at center because that's where Pendleton. You know what Pendleton is at guard. That's probably the highest ceiling for this Tennessee offensive line if Satterwhite can do that. But to me, so that maybe gives a tiebreaker or a little bit of a curve. William Satterwhite a little bit of a curve, but largely I think it's like, who do you have more trust in? Do you have more trust in William Satterwhite, or do you have more trust in Sham Umarov or Jesse Perry being one of those guys at the guard spot and then playing Pendleton at center? So that's almost the perspective I have on it. I guess the other thing I would say, we talk about offensive line.
It's a great thought.
A lot of times, like we talk about quarterback, because so many people, and traditionally, you just want to find your five and stick with it. Tennessee's been a little more willing to rotate. So I do think you could see them, especially in the interior, play multiple guys. Center is the one I think you'd rather just have your center locked down. But if it's, say it's Sam Pendleton who gets to start at center to start the year, I could see it being Umarov and Perry kind of splitting reps at that right guard spot. So that's something I think to keep in mind when it comes to rotating, because at least myself, and I think I can speak for others, you traditionally don't think of offensive line as being a rotating position as you would defensive line or running back or safety, some of these other position battles we might talk about. But in the interior, I think, especially the guard spots, it could be a little more of that than what you would, initially think.
It is an interesting mentality, because I personally, at first, hated the idea of just not having five guys. And like when they would rotate Dane Davis in and do all those different things, I was like, that I just can't get behind it. And then you think about it more, and it's like, well, you kind of see the principles of why they rotate on the defensive line paying off on the offensive line. If there's two guys that you feel are pretty even, or two guys that you feel like aren't, maybe playing at the exact level that they need to for an entire SEC game, well then, yeah, if they're both pretty comparable guys, split up the snaps and keep them fresh. Like maybe that is how you make them be more like an SEC ready guy, is by the time they're in the fourth quarter, they've played half the snaps and they're a little bit more fresh than they would have if they just played the whole time. Maybe it's tough to get a groove. It's a weird thing to think about, but I do see some of the benefits in, let's say it's Jesse Perry and Sham Umarov, and neither of them can create true separation. Pendleton's at center. Yeah, especially to start the year, like that Syracuse game, maybe they go two drives on and off. Like, all right, Pendleton or Umarov, you get two drives. you come off Perry, you get your, and try to do something like that. Maybe one guy grabs it and proves to be the starter, the full-time starter, which I think is still the ideal situation, is you have 5 guys you can look to every single down, and those are the 5 on the field. But especially to start the year, when you have Syracuse and the ETSU before Georgia gets to town, I wouldn't be surprised if they're rotated. And I think there are some actual benefits, particularly maybe against a team like Syracuse rather than Georgia.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, I still think it's ideal to have your best 5. I still like that more, especially to me, the tempo is a big part of it. Like if you're going to
Yes.
play at warp tempo, then sure. Yeah, it
Do
probably
we
is good to
expect that
rotate.
this year, though? Because
No, not
I
at
don't
all.
think they're going to go. I think it'll be the slowest
Yeah.
year yet for Heupel, and I don't think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't played that fast the last 2 years. Like that's
And I think
Right.
it's going to be slower this year than it has any of those 2 years.
yeah, it could be. It very well could be. I mean, then I think for them to get back to the tempo, I don't know, there's probably multiple things to go into this, and this is beside the point of the conversation on the podcast. But I think they got to at least have a multi-year starter.
If Nico is still a quarterback, I think there's a good chance, not that it reaches 2022 speed, but that it would be the fastest since then. I think that would have been very much a strong possibility. When you leave and you have another, I just don't think there's a chance that it's
new quarterback and new center. It's just
it feels like a disaster waiting to happen if you try to force it in just because you had success in 21, 22 doing it. Let's just go back to it. It's easier said than done, I guess is what I'm trying to say when you have those 2 new pieces.
all right. Some quick hitters here, defensive wise. Let's go over there and maybe come back to offense. Safety, Sylvia. You've been over on the defense side of practice field a lot. We know Andre Turrentine, he's a returning starter safety. Half a dozen Tennessee safeties entered the portal after spring, so it kind of whittled down the competition across from him. Who do you like, Idris Farouk or Caleb Beasley? Is that other starter?
I like Idris Farouk, and I think that's a spot that, it's easy to rotate on defense, so much easier on defense to rotate than offense, assuming the offense allows you to, that you're going up against. So
yeah,
I think it'll be Idris Farouk as the day one starter. He's gotten a lot of the quote-unquote first-team reps, if you want to call it that, as in when they split up into the safety groups and they get into 2 different lines, it's usually Andre Turrentine starting on one side and Idris Farouk starting on the other side. And he showed a lot of flashes last year. He had some of those young player mistakes in kind of big moments at times a year ago in SEC competition, but he also showed what he can do. And I think they're banking on that side of Idris Farouk to be more consistently there this season than the young player that of course he is still. That could lead to some negatives. So I think that's not a safety position that he'll play 55 snaps a game and you won't see anyone else there, but I do think he'll probably play the majority of those safety snaps this season.
Yeah, just based on what you've seen in practice, and Sylvia hit the nail on the head there, is that he's working in that spot, and we haven't been able to talk to Willie Martinez yet at the time of this recording, so maybe we will hear some more answers whenever we do. But if you're going, again, just kind of based on what you've seen from the field in that limited time that we've seen from practices, I also like Idris Farouk to, be that starting guy there. And like you said, we'll see what that rotation looks like, and we'll see kind of the versatility that those other guys have in the field. Caleb Beasley, I'm not sure what he brings to the table yet, based on just, again, what we've seen in the small spurts, but based on what you've seen in the field, I like Farouk.
Yeah, I think the question there again is just how much they rotate. Early on, they didn't rotate much at all, especially compared to some other spots on defense.
Oh, yeah.
But it's largely that's just because the veteran guys, they've had more proven guys, and neither of those guys, Caleb Beasley or Idris Farouk's proven. And Caleb Beasley, to me, matches the mold more of limit the big plays. Don't give up anything, behind us. Like Farouk is a little bit more of a Jacoby Thomas, come in, make plays in the run game, fly around. Caleb Beasley he was a high 4-star corner coming out of high school. He spent a lot of his freshman year working at corner. He feels more like a free safety type. So I'll be curious to see what that looks like. Rick, to you now. This is a position battle we don't really talk a lot about, but I'm very curious by is the running back room. There's 3 guys. We know there's 3 guys that are going to push for playing time. Peyton Lewis, Dar Thomas, I'm forgetting the third, Carnes kid, Deshaun Bishop.
Yeah.
It's kind of a 2-part question. Who would you, I guess, pencil in, and we'll probably do a full podcast on this with some preseason predictions either next week or in 2 weeks. Who would you pencil in to get the most carries this season, and how close to 33 do you expect it to look, as opposed to maybe one guy separating themselves as maybe not a bell cow, but a for sure true number one back.
Well, and I would also add in the question, and again, it's just something that I'm interested in, sort of in that mold of what you're asking is who's the late game guy as well, right?
Yeah,
If they
for sure.
need, once you get to the fourth quarter, and it's not just about, hey, this guy is a little bit more tired, this guy might be a little bit more banged up in the moment, so we're going to keep that rotation going. Who's the guy in the fourth quarter? If you say, hey, we've got a 3rd and 3, and we're going to be running the ball because the passing game has been a little bit limited, who's going to be the guy that they look at? My thought that going into the the preseason so far has been Deshaun Bishop is going to get that standard as the one. But again, I think that there is going to be rotation, and the whole Star Thomas thing, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, that's where that starts drawing a lot more intrigue and interest, because he's a guy who, it isn't just kind of coming off of some rotational role with this team or that team. I think he was an experienced guy during his time at Duke. And you just wonder sort of what this Tennessee offense can do for his, or what the Tennessee style of the offense can do for his game. I think that if Star Thomas's ceiling is reached, or at least if you're pushing up towards that ceiling, then he's going to be a really good back for this Tennessee offense. And I don't want to count out Peyton Lewis in that situation, but I think that maybe Peyton Lewis sort of continues. Last year, you obviously had Sampson and Bishop as the top two guys, and then Lewis got that work once things started. I wonder how much he can do. I think it does seem like he's changed his body a little bit more for the positive going into this preseason. That's something that you would like to see. But to me, the X factor is Star Thomas. I still go with Deshaun Bishop 1, just because he has had reps in this offense. I think he's a really talented back. I think he can do multiple things that this offense wants to do, and maybe he can get involved in the passing game a little bit more. But I think that the X factor here is Star Thomas. And again, I don't necessarily say that in a way of, can he rise to the occasion or something like that? I'm starting to feel more and more confident that he is going to be a solid running back for this Tennessee offense. Just sort of what ways do they use him in, and how often do they use him? Those are the two guys that I'm kind of looking at here as we head into the season. Obviously, things can change, and that's a position where guys get banged up a fair amount. But again, the Star Thomas conversation I think has been really fascinating, and that's kind of where I had it as well going into the preseason. But I've kind of been more, I don't know, more strengthened in that thought the more that we've heard from Star Thomas. But if you make the argument that maybe he could be that number one guy, then I'm not really going to fight you there either. I think that he brings that experience, and that he brings that juice to the table.
Stick with me here. 2023 roster. I don't mean this at all in how they run the ball, in any of the on-field attributes. I'm not trying to say they're similar running backs at all. In terms of usage, I think it could follow a very similar mold to the 2023 team. Now, it's a different running backs coach, so I'm kind of going to a different mentality in some ways when you're comparing Jerry Mack to Darrell Sims. But I could see Star Thomas being the Jalen Wright, who is the home run hitter. By the end of the year, you go, yeah, that's your best running back on the team. He's probably finishing most games with the hot hand, and you're trying to ride with him and probably getting the majority of snaps. I think Deshaun Bishop is your Jabari Small, where he's consistent, he's hard-nosed, he'll put his head down, he'll pick up short yardage if you need him to. He'll do a bunch of different things and just kind of be almost the glue guy of the room. Maybe doesn't have a breakout 150-yard rushing game, but you can count on him when you need to. And then Peyton Lewis would be the Dylan Sampson. That's really the big one, where it's like, I'm not trying to say that Peyton Lewis is
they're
anything
the same
like Dylan Sampson. Ridiculously different builds, but they're both sophomores. They could both get the hot hand at times. You saw in the Kentucky game in 23, by the end of the game, it was like, all right, Dylan Sampson, go win us the football game. That's what it seemed like Tennessee's mentality was. I could see that being Peyton Lewis, where 1, 2, 3 games this year, he's the one with the hot hand, and usually let him run loose. And that could also build up to not necessarily the junior year Dylan Sampson that's breaking records and rewriting the history books, but a really solid junior Peyton Lewis that they can rely on to be a starting running back next year if he does take a big third off season step ahead of the 2026 season. So that's kind of where I look at it. I would say it's probably going to be more of that three-headed monster that we saw in 2023 rather than the one-man show in 2024.
Oh, sure.
But if they get a hot hand on one given night, I would fully expect them to go. I think it'll average out by the end of the season, but on a game-to-game basis, it would probably be one guy getting the majority of touches if he's the guy with the hot hand.
The only thing I would firmly disagree with flip-flop, and I know you weren't projecting them as players, I think Peyton Lewis game-wise was a lot more Jalen Wright, and Star Thomas
Yes.
is maybe more Dylan Sampson. At least
Yeah.
more catching passes.
Yeah,
I think Star Thomas is the
I'm not
middle
trying to
screen
compare
guy.
the actual, because I
Yeah.
completely. If you're trying to compare the actual play styles, then I would 100% agree with you. But just in terms of almost usage and game to game production is where I was coming from with that. Because for sure, Star Thomas feels more Dylan Sampson, I guess. Not that he's going to rush for 50 touchdowns this season, but it feels, if you're trying to compare the actual on the field type of play, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by. I mean, look, there's so many much bigger questions on the offensive side that we're just not talking about running back a ton. I'm fascinated by what it's going to look like. And look, I think I was kind of poking at Chase earlier. I'll give him some credit here. I think he's had a really good thought on this. Where it's, you mentioned it, Sylvia. Jerry Mack rotated a ton. Darrell Sims last year didn't rotate much at all. And I think it at first glance, like I kind of passed that aside. Dylan Sampson was clearly their best player. He was the best thing they had going on offense. Deshaun Bishop was your second best running back. He missed a month in the season. The one thing that just makes me hold out on this to maybe think that Darrell Sims is not as big of a rotating guy is the Savion Hyder recruitment. That is, Tennessee has recruited 3-star running backs. They have, I mean, Peyton Lewis is a 4-star, but they have not seemingly put a ton of resources into recruiting running backs. They can run with anybody. And look, like I would agree. I think that's been solid. They are all in on Savion Hyder. I can't, and granted, they signed 2 running backs last year in last cycle. I can't, and look, I'm not the biggest recruiting guy. I can't even think of another running back name at all in this class. It's been Savion Hyder the entire time.
Yeah.
And you don't go out and get a guy like that unless your thought is he's going to be a true number one, which doesn't mean this year they couldn't rotate and he couldn't be the number one down the road. But that is the one thing with this running back, maybe not the battle, but the rotation itself that gives me a little bit of pause when you combine that with the fact that Dylan Sampson got 80% of the carries last year, maybe more than that.
If not more, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting thought. I still look at it as you do what you need to do, and Dylan Sampson getting 90% of the carries or whatever the number actually was is what they needed to do. This year, you probably need to rotate more. And that could, if Star Thomas is really, really good this year, or Deshaun Bishop is really, really good, I don't think they'll shy away from saying this guy's got to be on the field. I just think the production will be close enough between the three that you'll have some opportunity to rest guys without feeling like you're losing a bunch on the field. Now, if Savion Hyder comes in and lives up to his expectations, I think you're right. They could say this is your best chance to win the football game. He's going to play a lot. So I think it could be a year-to-year basis as well, where Jerry Mack felt more like, going to rotate your guys and live with that and get a bunch of guys different touches, which is part of also in his defense, or not even criticism, but in his defense, that his rosters and depth chart called for that a lot more than what Tennessee had last year. I just feel like it's almost a year-to-year basis, and they're comfortable maybe more so now with Darrell Sims, or he's more comfortable to have a bell cow than they did in the past. But at the same time, I just feel like this year's roster is way more conducive to saying, even if it's 50% of the snaps for Star Thomas, that's still a huge drop off compared to like what felt like 80 or 90% for Dylan Sampson last year.
Well, and
we
to your point, go ahead.
I was just going to say we should note, and I think everybody listening just knows this, Savion Hyder is not committed to Tennessee. We don't know if he's going to go to Tennessee.
But they have put all their eggs in that basket.
They have put all their eggs in that basket. And they
are in 2027, they have huge names circled on that list as well.
It's true too. Yeah.
Like the running back, you are right, where it was, Dylan Sampson, they great identification of him. Great job being like, this guy could be really good, even though it's just a 3-star. But it's not
Jalen, right?
Jalen, but it's not like, you're going
more big time
for the 5 stars and things. You're absolutely correct.
Dylan Sampson was from Baton Rouge, and LSU didn't want him, which was hilarious given LSU's struggles at running back the last couple of years.
My last thing. Yeah, so my last thing on the running back thought is to go along with what your point, because I do think that's a really interesting thing. And frankly, one thing that I did not think about, I think we do learn something about Darrell Sims this year, and sort of what he wants to do. But, and again, that's not to say that anybody is kind of stuffed into a box of what they're always going to be, because you're right. If you eventually get a player to the caliber of what Savion Hyder is, then you change your usage, or you change your offense to kind of fit a guy like that. He's that talented and that good. But I think we do sort of figure out, how how versatile does Darrell Sims want to get with his room? And I also think that a part of the conversation this year that might not be as prevalent next year, or maybe wasn't as prevalent last year, is just sort of just the and again, I know that Tennessee really leaned on the running game last year, and that was really important. But what happens when guys really start stacking the box, a lot of the game against Tennessee because of that run game? And maybe, again, if the passing game is a little bit more limited or a little bit more inconsistent, do you need just more of that rotation throughout the game to keep those guys fresh and healthy when they're taking up those big hits and when they are asked to do as much as, what I believe that they are going to be asked to do? So I think that the rotation, and again, to what extent, don't know, but that's not out of the question by any stretch. But I do think that we might learn a little bit about Darrell Sims and sort of his philosophy, the way that he wants to do things, at least in sort of this kind of environment that he's got this year. But again, I also think that the passing game and the struggles or the triumphs that does bring will play a part in how this running back room shakes out as well.
I think if opponents start to stack the box against, I think Josh Heupel starts licking his chops a little bit. I think he would take that in a heartbeat. Like, you're trying to take the run away. You can finally start trying to get stuff over the top now in the pass game, which is depleted in terms of receivers and stuff like that. But just
see if they can hit him.
Yeah. Just the
Hey,
way
Joey Halsley said at the beginning of the fall camp that was the number one thing that they worked on this offseason, was how to get those explosive plays back. So maybe if another team opens that door, I think that Tennessee would try to run through it. But again, execution is something that's waiting to be seen on the field.
That is part. You have to go out and execute. I think that's a big deal. But the reason that they were struggling to get those explosives is because teams were doing the opposite, and they were saying run the ball. Sure, you're just not going to have 5 touchdowns with Jalen Hyatt against us. And Tennessee struggled at first to, I don't want to say identify that, but to really lean into it maybe in 2023. And last year, they're like, sure, you'll just ride Dylan Sampson all the way. A quick pivot off the running backs, just because you talked about Darrell Sims, and we'll learn a lot about him. I think we'll learn a lot about Willie Minge as well. They're paired together because they came in at the same time. Last year, Willie Minge talked a lot about how much he wants to rotate his guys. There's 2 very obvious guys at the front in Jeremiah Teeler and Aaron Carter. Last year, he did not have the depth after Keenan Peely went down to actually rotate, and Edwin Spillman was hurt, and Julian Burns was hurt. Now you have the depth to go out and do those types of things where you have the 2 redshirt freshmen behind them that they seem very comfortable playing already. You have 2 true freshmen and the 2 Jadens that they seem relatively comfortable to play. I think we'll learn a little bit about William Inge too, as far as, is he truly going to rotate and get deep and get 5, 6 linebackers on the field throughout a game? Or is it going to be a little tough to say, Aaron Carter, you have to sit a little bit. Jeremiah Teeler, you have to sit a little bit, because those guys are very good SEC defense or linebackers already in this point in their career as just seniors.
Yeah,
when you're talking about
I feel a lot more confident they're going to play guys. The fact that Edwin Spillman played serious snaps in the Vanderbilt game with the college football playoff on the line, coming off of injury and having played against nobody in his entire career, I think they'll rotate a lot, at least 4 deep. The freshman aspect of it, I think, is the one that gets a little bit more interesting.
Yes.
But I think they'll at least be consistently 4 deep there.
Yeah, I think those 3 are pretty set in stone, that those guys are not only taking that next step or ready to take that next step. Jordan Burns is a guy that we'll see how that kind of evolves throughout the season and what kind of role he might step up, or hey, does one of these other freshman guys, whether it's Perlotti or Harmon, can they do something that impresses William Minge enough to see some sort of action on the field that with that 4th spot. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to see Edwin Spillman on the field. And again, that's not to take any knock on T-Lander and I almost said T-Lander and Jeremiah. No, T-Lander and Carter, because I think that they are phenomenal and one of the true best duos on this team in any capacity, kind of position duos, if you will. But Edwin Spillman is a guy that I'm extremely excited to see, not only because of the praise that was, kind of given to him throughout the preseason so far, but just what he was able to do with kind of closing out that freshman season last year and sort of knowing what he brings to the table. So that's a guy that I'm extremely excited to see. And I think that Tennessee's got a lot of confidence in him as that very next guy, ready to hit the field when he's needed to.
Quick apology on my end. I think I said Julian Burns twice in the last 2 days. Jordan Burns. Julian Burns is a 3-star defensive back that committed to UNC that Tennessee was recruiting. So different guys.
So he's a real guy out there. He's a real
Julian
guy.
Burns is a real guy. And that the J Burns has thrown me off. Julian Burns went to he's a Belichick guy. He'll be with Dayton and Carson Snead and company over there. So that's my apologies to Jordan Burns, who is the redshirt freshman linebacker. But if you are able to rotate, I think that's a big deal because Tennessee's been injured at the linebacker position for the majority of Josh Heupel's tenure. You lost Keenan Peely to essentially two freak injuries 2 years in a row. Like, I don't think that's something to read too much into, but it did hurt, and it does show that, it's a position that you can get injured in pretty quickly. Arian Carter got injured his freshman year. I think it was the Missouri game that he was officially like, okay, he shut down for the season. It came out right after that game. They've had injuries throughout their tenure. So if you're able to scratch theoretically 6 deep, if you're including those 2 freshmen that they seem already somewhat confident in playing, that's a good thing to have to maybe keep your guys fresh and make sure that Jeremiah Thielander and Arian Carter are on the field when this season ends. And you're essentially, you would think, given the schedule, trying to make a playoff push. We'll see exactly what that ends up looking like. But on paper, this team's competing for a spot in the playoffs, and you want your guys healthy by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. The last thing I'll say on running backs, the only things I am confident in running backs, or confident about the running backs, prediction-wise, they're going to be good. It's going to be a good group.
Yep.
And Deshaun Bishop will get the first snap of the season. Deshaun Bishop will be out there snap number 1. Who ends up being the lead guy? Who ends up being 2? Who ends up being 3? I don't have any clue. I could see it going in a number of different directions, but I think Bishop will be out there first snap of the season.
They'll have 3 oars in bold on the depth chart.
That's true. We can add that.
I 100% agree.
Deshaun
Bishop will be the running back on the field for the first snap of the season. 100% agree with that. I could imagine him not even playing the most snaps in the game, but I think they're going to tip their cap to Deshaun Bishop for the first drive at the very. And he could be the best running back this year. Like, he's plenty capable. He could be the guy that plays 60% of the snaps plus this season. Like, he's capable of that. But at the very least, I think he's the starter day one.
He's got the highest floor of that group, I think, is for sure.
And I also think that they're going to want to see what Star Thomas brings to the table. So those are the 2 guys that I think will get a good bit of reps in that Syracuse game, and we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, we are, golly, we're approaching an hour already. It feels like we could talk about so much more, which we certainly will throughout what's left of 20 days away, less than 3 weeks from the time of this recording to Tennessee's season opener against Syracuse over in Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Still plenty to get into, still another fall camp scrimmage for Tennessee to have. And again, I think after that one, some of these questions that we've been talking about, some of these different thoughts that we might have, might come into a more clear look after that one. We will have to wait and see, but certainly plenty more to talk about. Guys, I think that'll wrap it up for us today, unless anybody has any kind of last minute thoughts they want to get to. But I think that's pretty good, and I think we covered a whole lot of ground with that one. Hey, as always, we got a couple of great partners here at Rocky Top Insider. Go ahead and check out WATE Sports Coverage, as Ryan Sylvia and I will actually be joining them for a little bit of a Tennessee football preview coming up in this next week. I'm not sure exactly what their distribution plans for that is with Sam Rothman and Casey K and their great team over there. But Sylvia and I will be doing that. So make sure you are looking out for that one. And then, of course, Pancakes and Bacon over on the Rocky Top Insider Network on YouTube is up and rolling now again. So make sure you are adding them to your daily podcast feed again as well. But as always, just making sure you're checking out RockyTopInsider.com each and every day as we try to bring you the best Tennessee news, notes, and coverage we can. You can also follow Rocky Top Insider on all different social media platforms. We are at Rocky Top Insider on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, all 5 major platforms. We are there. But of course, we got great guys who you can follow here as well. You can follow Ryan Shumpert at rshump00. You can follow Ryan Sylvia at Ryan T. Sylvia. And you can follow myself if you'd like to at Rick_Butler on that one. And our good friend Jack Foster, who's still around, just not with us here today, at Jack Foster Media. As man, I know he's itching for the college football season to come around as well. That is just he embodies what a college football junkie is. So I know he cannot wait for this one as well. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close this thing out. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast here today. For Ryan Shumpert, for Ryan Sylvia, I am Rick Butler. We'll catch you back for the next one, and we will see you over at RockyTopInsider.com.